This is the third session in Ethics Week, Governing for the Greater Good, Politics of Public Service. Brian's my PowerPoint guy, so here's the usual suspects here. Okay. My name's Ken Milani. I taught Joe Zakas, who was an Indiana State Senator. Didn't recognize Joe when he walked in the room because his eyes were open. Okay. I also taught Jamie O'Brien, but Jamie and I have a common plague. Okay, we're both lifelong Cub fans. Okay, and so we know that any team can have a bad century, right? Next year. Okay. And then Andy Kostielney is probably the only guy here who can remember what it would be like to be a student when Notre Dame won a national championship in football, right? Graduated in 1989, okay? And Andy is a St. Joe County Commissioner. And Jamie is on the St. Joe County as a council. So we're going to have each one of these speakers address one question. The first question will be, what are the ethical dimensions of making a decision in government as a public servant? Joe Zakas is going to handle that one. What is the impact of our current political climate, partisanship, gridlock, etc. on governing? What is the cure? Jamie's going to handle that one. And then Andy will take the third question. What are the ethics issues in government in the wake of the November 2012 elections? And then after they do their comments, we'll open it up for Q&A. So we're going to go to the first question, and that's Joe Zakas. What are the ethical dimensions of making a decision in government as a public servant?
Thank you, Ken. Thank you for coming today. Even though I'm a White Sox fan, I don't hate Cubs. Not much. Well, ethics, I mean, I looked up Wikipedia, I know how to do that, and it's not something I learned a few decades ago from the budgeting class I had with Professor Milani. That's come, the technology that's gone on developed since then has been unbelievable. But ethics mainly has to do with behavior, providing guidance. Ethics laws provide guidance to do the right thing, to act in the right way. So what we have here today on our panel is someone who's involved in state government at the legislative level. And then we have local government, which is under federal, state, and the local. We have both an executive branch type here and a legislative branch type here with Jamie O'Brien on the Legislative County Council, County Commissioner Andy Kostielney. And the kinds of issues and stuff we deal with are really different depending on what level of government you're involved with. And I'm sure you heard, I think on Monday, you had a federal lobbyist in here probably talking more about what he does with regard to Congress and congressional work. But here we have the state of Indiana being represented. And where do I go for guidance when it comes to ethical issues? And as I was preparing this, I always like to start with the Constitution myself. I love the Constitution. We have a state constitution that actually makes, I think, an ethical statement. This is from the 1850 state constitution. Indiana was first formed in 1816 and developed a new constitution in 1850, its second constitution. In section 30, article 4, under the legislative section, it says that no senator or representative shall, during the term which he may have been elected, be eligible to any office, the election to which is vested in the General Assembly, nor shall he be appointed to any civil office of profit which shall have been created, or the emoluments of which should have been increased during such term of his period of since he was elected. But the later provision shall not be construed to apply to any office elected by the people. So, in other words, what they're concerned about there is what might be called an appearance of impropriety, where someone in the legislature pushes for, votes for the creation of some office in state government and then gets appointed to that, makes it probably a better living than he would have, or she would have otherwise. And the Constitution says, no, you have to have an election in between that. So it's a way to make appearances, for appearances' sake, things look better. And that goes all the way back to 1850 in our Constitution. But I also then looked at the Indiana statutes. Indiana statutes, you can find them online. There's a whole section called legislative ethics in the state statutes. They talk about creating a committee, an ethics committee in both the Indiana House and the Indiana Senate, and then we create rules that are basically overseen by in our case, the Senate Legislative Ethics Committee. I was chair of that committee for a while, and this is our rule book, which includes the ethical rules, the Senate rules. Now the House, of course, the Indiana House also has its ethical rules. The Indiana statutes require that both chambers have an ethics committee of 6 people, which is interesting because it's an even number, meaning you're going to have members from both parties in equal numbers. That's usually the majority party, of course, in any committee will rule and have the majority in any committee. This is an exception to that, and an important exception. And the statute gives this committee in the House or Senate certain powers to hear complaints, to investigate complaints that can come really from any source with regard to ethical issues. They can recommend an appropriate sanction. They can recommend legislation to the General Assembly to improve conduct. And they can be an advisory body to individual members of the General Assembly. Probably the most common work of the committee is to answer questions concerning conflicts of interest by members of the Senate, and I presume also of the House. In Indiana, we have a part-time legislature, and we have jobs outside the legislature, and we're required, though, to vote on bills every now and then which come into conflict with what we might be doing outside of our service as a legislator. We have a requirement, if you're on the floor, you have to vote, period. So you're sitting there and all of a sudden, whoa, I've got a possible conflict here. Hopefully you know in advance, and you actually can write a request for a ruling by the committee. You meet with the committee in camera, in confidential nature, and then they can make a ruling as to whether or not they think that it would be ethical or not for you to vote on a specific issue, or whether or not there's a conflict of interest. I can give you an example of something that I actually brought before the committee in the Senate a few years ago. I'm with a law firm called Thorne Grodnick here in town, and they had a case that was ruled on by I think it only went up to the appellate court, not the Indiana Supreme Court. I could be wrong about that, but the issue had to do with the signing of a will. And we represented people who were harmed when a man was asked to sign a will, and he was infirm, and he put his X on the will, okay? He was very infirm. And it changed the distribution of his estate to the detriment of our clients. The bill, the ruling went all the way up, the issue went up to the appellate court. And one of the issues, issues that our firm raised, which I'm kind of proud of in a way, is this: that when you have a will, you have the body of the will which distributes your assets, right? There's also another provision that follows that called self-proving. And it used to be the case that if someone witnessed you signing a will, they had to be brought in after a death to testify that the person was over 18 years of age, or an adult of sound mind. So what we do now, we self-prove a will. So it has a second section that says, yes, the same witnesses sign again that this person was of sound mind, correct age, and all that. A lot of law firms in Indiana, the big ones, had their wills signed only at the end of the will. So they didn't sign the first part, they signed the last part, thinking it applied to the whole thing, the whole will. And our firm said, oh no, it doesn't. That only applies to the self-proving part. The guy never signed the distribution part of the will. And the court said, yeah, that's right, you have to sign in both places. Whoops. All of the huge law firms in Indiana and the labor unions who would hire law firms to do service for their members, they almost all signed in one place. So this decision voided out thousands of wills all across the state of Indiana. So the Bar Association and the big law firms say, hey, we need to fix this legislatively. We need to say that you don't have to do that. be retroactive. So it applies to the situation that the court's dealt with. Well, what am I supposed to do? I mean, I'm in a kind of dilemma there, right? If I vote for it, I'm voting against the interests of my law firm. If I vote against it, it looks like I'm being influenced in my decision-making because my law firm wants to go the other way. So that was an example, though, of the kind of conflict of interest issue that we have to take sometimes before our ethics committee. Now, the ethics laws try to give guidance in other ways as well. You've probably heard of Jack Abramoff. I heard him speak at a conference recently in Chicago. It was kind of interesting to hear him. He spent 43 months in prison because of the influence he had and unethical influence he had in Congress. He said he got used to winning fights. So what he would take money and spend it on for sports tickets for congressmen. He's had $1 million, $1.5 million a year to spend on sports tickets for congressmen. And he would take them on these lavish travel junkets that you probably, I don't know, maybe you're too young. Well, he would take them on these junkets all over the world. And what he said at this conference I went to, he said, I overdid everything. I didn't allow my moral compass to enter into it. The ends justified the means. So that was how his thinking was when he was a lobbyist in Washington. But one of the things we did in Indiana is people tend to kind of lump us all together. I would go home and people would say, how's it been in Washington? Well, I go to Indianapolis, where you have 50 state senators, 100 state reps who represent areas in the state of Indiana. We're not congressmen. But people some kind of lump us together. So one of the things we did was to change the law with regard to lobbyists paying legislators for trips. And we banned that for trips and related items. And we changed the ethics laws in the state of Indiana, in part in response to that kind of Abramoff situation. We've also changed recently in Indiana for legislators. We say that you cannot take a job as a lobbyist for at least 1 year after you leave office. Now this, again, tends to be someone like Abramoff. When they talked about that point at the conference I was at, he said, well, yeah, but you can have a partner in your firm, and then you can call your friend in Congress and say, hey, I've got a friend from my firm coming in to see you. Is that all right? And so there's you can have all the ethics laws and rules that you want. There's always some way, somehow, people try at least, they shouldn't, they try to get around them. But we did this at the legislative level. We had done this, or the executive branch in Indiana had done this also, saying that if you had a position in the executive branch, you had to wait a year before you could do any lobbying. And it was kind of interesting because Governor Mitch Daniels recently became the president of Purdue after leaving the governor's job. And the question arose, can you lobby? Don't you have to wait a year before you can lobby? And the basic answer to the question was no. And I think basically because, well, I'm an elected official in the executive branch, but I'm not an employee in the typical sense of the executive branch. So the ethical panel that he appointed decided it was fine for him to lobby. However, just the other day, guess what happens? This is 1/26/13, Saturday. Daniels won't lobby for Purdue during this session of the legislature. And it was more, well, I don't really have to after all, because the decisions that were made that I would be lobbied for weren't made by me anyways, and things are kind of in process without me being involved. So that was very interesting. The headline in the Sunday's Indianapolis Star this week was big ethics issue. The front page of the Star Sunday about I-69 and someone who had worked in the Department of Transportation, about he and their family buying certain parcels of land south of Indianapolis where I-69 was going to be built, and then benefiting from some of the appraisals that were going on with regard to that. And it's a big multi-day story still in Indianapolis. There's other types of ethical rules and laws that we've passed. We used to have to report gifts that we get from lobbyists, only if they were over $100. Well, we brought that down to 50. And I can tell you, as someone who goes out to dinner now and then in Indy, I'm going to be reported sometimes now that I wasn't going to be reported on before. And you have to be able to face your constituents and address an issue like that that can be raised in a political campaign. We have other types of financial disclosure rules that we have. And even there's an organization called the National Conference of State Legislatures, and you get to go to their conferences, and they have things like ethics training, which was part of the Jack Abramoff panel that he was on in Chicago last summer. But they'll have these kinds of seminars for legislators from all across the country. So these ethics laws and rules that we have to abide by, they can provide some guidance on how we can act in the right way, but it's the application of these rules that tend to be very, very fact specific, as I can give you an example in my case. But right now, I guess I'll...
Thanks, Joe. I'm going to go to the second question here now. What is the impact of our current political climate, partisanship, gridlock, careerism, campaign financing, and governing? What is the cure? Jamie O'Brien's going to tackle that one.
Great, I appreciate that. There's a lot of questions in that question, and I thought I would start with a question. And I see a lot of my students in here. How many of you are accounting students? Okay. How many of you think you will be a better accountant 3 years from now than you will be 1 year from now? You can do a better job. In 5 years from now, you think you will be better? Okay, so start with the careerism idea. In the marketplace, in the real world outside of government, typically we believe that the longer you're at the job, the better you do, the more efficient you are, the more successful you be, the better services you provide your constituents. Sometimes in the government arena, that seems to, I believe, a lot of what I'm presenting is my perception of the ethical considerations here. A lot of folks look at government officials and office holders and believe that the longer you're there, the more trouble you are, the more difficult it is to be detached from your decisions and to think about what your constituents want and what the right thing to do is. And this idea of careerism, I personally believe is a big problem. I think that the idea or the concept of term limits has benefit. I think it would be very beneficial at every level of government to have turnover, to have a mandatory retirement from a specific office. And that's kind of counterintuitive, because if you look at Congress, someone who's been in Congress for a long time knows how the process works, knows how when you're a little kid you watch Saturday morning cartoons, I'm just a bill sitting on Capitol Hill. You guys remember that? Is that before your time? But the process of how a law becomes a law, the experienced, seasoned congressmen know how to get things done for their district, their constituents. So for their constituents, maybe that's good. But maybe not, though, as well, because they know how to get things done. Perhaps they have very little restraint. I think there's two ways to look at this, and I would be remiss if I didn't suggest I'm giving you my view, which it doesn't have to be your view, but I do think careerism is a problem. I think term limits would be of benefit, certainly at the federal level, probably also at the state and local level. But as you all observed 3.5 minutes ago, the longer you're at a job, the better you do. So there's another way to look at that, or another consideration. Like Joe Zakas, my senator, I love the Constitution and the idea of the campaign finance consideration. The Supreme Court has spoken that there are very limited roles that government can put on campaign finance. The First Amendment of the Constitution protects an awful lot of political speech, including campaign finance expenditures. You don't necessarily have to like that. I don't always like that, but I do love the Constitution. Conceptually, is there too much money in politics? Perhaps. But political speech is very important speech, perhaps the most important speech. If you think about the different types of speech, we have commercial speech where a business or an individual might be advertising, trying to sell a product. That's important, but that's not nearly as important as the ability of our citizenry to speak out, to criticize, to question, to try to advocate on behalf of their point or their politicians, which is, it's not unique to the United States, but it is not universally permitted. Try standing up in Tehran and criticizing the central government, or in Riyadh, or in much of North Africa, criticizing the government, and see how long you get to do that. Write a letter to the editor in the South Bend Tribune criticizing the mayor. Your house isn't going to be confiscated or burned. You might get some other folks that agree with you, you might get some folks that disagree. But political speech in its different forms, which also includes campaign speech, the commercials that, depending on your tastes, may be more interesting or less interesting than Super Bowl commercials, but they're out there, and they are part of the political speech, part of the protected by the First Amendment. Not just because I say so, but because the Supreme Court says so. That said, I believe there is widespread belief that there is a need for campaign finance reform and more campaign finance control. I personally believe that the best approach is through disclosure, that is making it clear who is paying for the commercial or who is paying for the mailer in your mailbox. The students here, any of you, I'm sure you watch TV, just in political commercials, but have you gotten mailers, political mailers, things in your mailbox about this candidate or that candidate? Okay. The other two issues I think kind of go hand in hand, partisanship and gridlock, and I think that it's important to remember, just because I tell you this is a basketball, doesn't make it a basketball, right? This isn't a basketball, is it? Everybody see what I'm holding up? What is this? This is a stapler, right? It's a pen. Just because I say it's a basketball or a stapler doesn't make it so. Just because I disagree with you doesn't mean I'm partisan. I might be, but it doesn't mean that I am. There is I believe, a very big rift in this country and throughout the world, but particularly in this country with different issues, not every issue, but many important social, fiscal, and political issues, even beyond Cubs versus Sox. There are big differences in the proper role of government, the sanctity of life, the Second Amendment, maybe the drinking age, proper restrictions on adoptions. There are a lot of differences, and I think that individuals in 2013 are very quick to blame someone who disagrees with them as being partisan or as not being open-minded, rather than perhaps acknowledging that maybe the person has a very well thought out and principled position. 160 years ago, abolitionists, I suspect, were thought of being very, very, very partisan in their positions, and thank God they were, because 160 years ago, slavery was the law of, not the whole land, the law of part of the land. Depending upon the issue that's raised, I think that partisanship does rear its head, and I think it rears its head in the context of misstating or misleading individuals. So, for instance, my wife and I like to play euchre. So, if she gets up to go get a pop or a soda, depending on what you call it, and she leaves the room, while she's out of the room, I look at her cards. Okay, so when I'm up for re-election in 2014, if my opponent says, "Hey, O'Brien cheats on his wife," I guess that's true, right? Not only that, I won that game. So O'Brien cheats on his wife and he beats his wife. Well, that's obviously a mischaracterization, and that's an over-the-top mischaracterization, right? But
not really.
Actually, I'm Joe's councilman, and he's my senator, so I promised to vote for him if he promised to vote for me.
He hasn't been up for election yet. I've been up for, I don't know, 10 or 12 elections already.
That's true. I actually was appointed to fill a vacancy, so my election was with only 16 people in the special election with precinct committee folks. And I was one of those 16, so I knew I had one vote. But my point is that I think partisanship truly exists where information is mischaracterized or taken out of context as opposed to situations where folks may have principal differences. Now, some politicians may legitimately look at an issue and say, well, if the Republicans are going to be for this, I'm against it. Or if the Democrats are against it, I'm for it. I think most elected officials I know think about the issues and reach their positions primarily based upon their philosophical predispositions, and their philosophical predispositions often lead them to one party or another, or perhaps a third party or independent status. But the partisanship that I often, my characterization or belief in part of the existence of partisanship arises where folks take things out of context and mischaracterize or misstate what really exists. The last aspect, or the last issue here, gridlock, it seems that the country is, if we assume that there's really just two political parties, and there are more than two, but there are two primary political parties, the country does seem to be pretty close to equal in their population distribution between Republicans and Democrats. Now, the Electoral College might not suggest that, but if you look at Congress, which is pretty close across the country, and what that means is to make progress in accomplishing tasks or moving legislation forward, there has to be some level of cooperation. But cooperation may not be good if the task at hand is something that is a bad idea or is an improper idea. Fiscal policy is an important consideration and a big issue. If there was legislation before Congress to raise income taxes to 99%, I would expect there would be an awful lot of people who would just dig their heels in and say, no way, I'm going to do everything I can to grind to a halt. That's just outrageous, it's counterproductive, there's no way the country can function at that level. Well, how about 98%? How about 97%? How about 39%? How about 38%? Just depends on what the issue is. I submit to you that there is gridlock, but that sometimes gridlock is better than moving forward with bad decisions or reactionary decisions. The cure for the problems, and the problems may be actual, they may be perceived, but I think the cure is in seeing a lot more individuals like I see in this room right here, 22, 23-year-old young adults, using their time, talent, treasure in the political arena, not just with PricewaterhouseCoopers or Deloitte and O'Brien or KPMG O'Brien or whatever firm they go to work with, but with their county councils, with their township assessor's office, with their state representatives' offices, and perhaps at the congressional level or at the Senate level. Indiana has a U.S. Senator, Joe Donnelly, who's a donor. I didn't support him. I've never voted for him, but I know him. I believe he is, has a good heart. I believe he will do his best to represent the state of Indiana. It's a good illustration of showing a donor who has that servant mentality. He's been involved in politics for quite a while. And I would invite you all to give that some consideration. And at the local level, there's plenty of opportunities to serve and to try to attack some of these problems while still being an accountant or while still being a CFO. All three of us up here are part-time office holders. None of our roles are full-time, although I bet Andy really does spend close to full-time because he's an extremely hard worker. Joe and I, being accountants, perhaps we're not as hard working as Andy is.
And I cannot vote for Jamie if I wanted to, so he's not fishing.
Although I can vote for Andy, the way the districts lie. But I would encourage you all to consider getting involved. Perhaps not next year, but 3-4 years down the road where you've got your CPA, you pass the CPA, it's under your belt, and there's an opportunity to use some of your time and talents to address political issues in whatever community you are.
Thanks, Jamie. Question 3, Andy's going to handle this one. What are the ethics issues in government in the wake of the November 2012 elections?
And I'm going to kind of focus more on here locally because that's the political realm in which I operate. But I think it's the same basic issues as we take it both statewide and nationally as well. And that is just, how do we get something done? I think we've seen the disapproval rating of Congress and of just politicians in general is got to be close to an all-time low. And for that group, that's saying something considerably, to be all-time low in that field. So how do we change that? I think that's one of the issues that we see that some of the gridlock is happening in Washington and at the state level as well. Just things aren't getting done, and people elect us to govern and to make decisions to try and make whatever sphere of influence they have better. And sometimes it doesn't get done all the time. If Jamie said here locally we're part-time, so that makes, from a conflict of interest standpoint, makes it kind of interesting because I'm also an employee of the University of Notre Dame. So we've had situations where my role could come in direct contrast with what's best for the university. So the best for my constituents may not be what's best for the university. So we always have those levels of conflict that we need to work on. But Jamie and I both, the university was looking to add or change Douglas Road here to the north part of campus. And we both voted on this issue. We both chose, even though we had no direct conflict as given us by our legal representation, we both chose to not vote for that particular project because of it would look inappropriate if that happens. We wanted to make sure that the work that was being done was more important than the politics of it all. And here at the county, we deal with very high level important issues like how do we fix potholes? Is your recycling going to get picked up on time? Or is this corner a good location for a gas station or a convenience?
This is the executive branch at work.
So these are things that we deal with. Here locally, as a result of the 2012 election, you have 3 Republicans sitting in front of you. Now there was a time in St. Joe County when we would have made up the entire elected officers of the neighborhood in the county. But something happened in 2012 here locally that hadn't happened in probably 40 years, if not longer. There's a probate court judge, a Republican, won election, and the Republicans, we now hold 2 seats on the Board of Commissioners. It's a 3-person board. So for the first time in 40 years, the local GOP has some direct control about how things go. So what that means is for the last 40 years, we've been kind of complaining about how things have worked or how this has happened or how things have been done. Now all of a sudden, we're the ones who have a lot more control of what those things are.
Be careful what you ask.
So we need to make sure that we act appropriately to not, all the things that folks have been complaining about for 40 years, that we don't make those same mistakes. So I think there's a heightened level of scrutiny that all politicians are facing these days, and no matter what level you're on, because a lot of people are tired of putting partisanship and politics before people and policy. So that's one of the biggest things that we have to face is how do we reach across the aisle and work well. Now locally, it's a little bit easier. If that's a bad spot to put an animal clinic, well, it's a bad spot. It's not really a partisan issue. But we need to focus more on how do we work together to accomplish things than how do we try and entrench ourselves in whatever political party that we may hold. I know from a pressure group standpoint, that's one of the things that we face too. How do we kind of deal with the special interest groups that often impact us? I've got 2 primary special interest groups, my mother-in-law and my wife. So if I can make them happy, which is about a 50-50 proposition at best, but if, that's who I'll go to. And if they think it's a decent decision, they think it makes sense, then I have a fairly decent chance of making the other people that I represent happy. Otherwise, I'm gonna be afraid I'm gonna wake up one morning with a pillow smushed on my face there. If you guys have anything you might want to add to that?
Just
because your issues are a little bit different than Jamie and I face here locally.
I'm trying to think about a special interest issue that may be something to talk about, because you do have something called, for example, the Indiana CPA Society. They have various interests that we get to deal with down in the Senate House in the Indiana legislature. But one that was kind of interesting is when a lobbyist will push for a certain company, and they want a certain type of legislation. One example is the red light cameras. I don't know if you're familiar with red light cameras or not, where the camera will take a picture of the car going through a red light, and it will get the license plate and then send you a ticket in the mail, a $100 fine. Be careful, Washington, D.C. makes tens of millions of dollars a year on red light cameras. And that's part of the consideration that you have to kind of think through when you're faced with a proposal like we were in Indianapolis. That they will say that this is going to save lives, to stop the T-boning of cars that go running through an intersection. And the local government says, well, this is a big safety measure. Well, the fact of the matter is they make a lot of money on this deal, and the company that provides the equipment also makes a lot of money on this. And it's not necessarily a matter of safety, in fact, which is one of the reasons why it hasn't made progress in Indiana. It's that they learn, for example, by, you can check this out in some of the intersections. If you have the red lights on all of the red lights on at the same time for a period of, I forget if it's 2 or 4 seconds, or a few seconds, that the number of T-bone accidents just decreases enormously. So there's a very simple solution to the T-boning and the safety issue that the other side raises. So then it becomes, in my view at least, it's more of a, somebody wants to make maybe some money for government and make for the business. So, in other states, though, people have this. I think the city of Houston actually had it, and then the city council had to repeal their ordinance setting up the red light cameras. So I don't know if that's exactly an ethical issue, but it gives you an example of sort of the overall scope of the things you have to think about when you're presented with some proposals down in the legislature.
Why don't we open it up? Let's give them a hand first for their... And then we'll open it up to questions, okay? We got George and then John, okay? Sure.
Thank you very much. I've been living here in South Bend for 20 years now. I'm from Europe, and my father was in politics, so I'm very interested in what you're saying. I read a few days ago in the South Bend Tribune that South Bend has a poverty rate of 24%. 24% of the population of South Bend are poor. Is this an issue for politics?
Yeah, of course it is. I guess the issue as I see it is what's the proper role of government in stimulating the economy, making the environment beneficial for businesses that want to expand or create jobs. And on the one hand, perhaps government could expand its employment, but if it does expand employment, if it does create jobs like after the Great Depression to provide opportunities for folks, then what does that do to the market? On the other hand, we need to look at what are restrictions or impediments to business. St. Joe County, I believe, this is Jamie O'Brien's policy analysis here, I think St. Joe County has some real impediments to business. There's ordinances that are in place countywide right now that restrict the granting of property tax abatements to attract new business. The role of government, depending upon your philosophical view, can compound the problem, make the problem worse, and could also result in improving a lot of the 24% of the folks that are in poverty. St. Joe County, or South Bend is part of St. Joe County, and just like in any other area, if you look at just the boundaries of any area, you could probably find a part of St. Joe County, or a part of South Bend where the poverty rate is 40%, and a part where it's 10%. So I think just looking at one portion or one portion of the county by itself is perhaps misleading. If you look at the county as a whole, it's much more encouraging. But absolutely, this is an issue for the politicians. I think within South Bend, the mayor who was here yesterday is going to have a lot more control, a lot more input as to what can or can't be done to attract business or to drive business away. On a bigger scale, look at Detroit, which is in much worse shape and is very horribly managed. Mayor Buttigieg has been a mayor now for a little over a year, and I know he has a tremendous enthusiasm. At lunch, Mr. Milani mentioned that some of the things that he's done to know more about and learn more about what's going on in the city, including going out to murder scenes, which is kind of scary to me to think about. But I think it's going to take time to see if he has any answers, if he's able to implement any answers. But certainly, it is a political consideration.
I think one of the issues too is, at least in Indiana, the way poor relief is structured, the way folks that get their money is it's not even done at the city or the county level, it's not the township level. So if people around here need to say, if you're in the city of South Bend, you don't go to South Bend and get poor relief help with your rent or food, those kind of things, you'd have to go to your township trustee to do that. So a lot of it, the process can be kind of cumbersome, and there's the extra layer or two of government that have to be fed off of those dollars. So even the dollars that we do give towards trying to fight poverty issues in some cases isn't being spent as well as it could be.
We got Jack?
Glad to. Hey, thanks for coming, guys. This is a great opportunity for all of us. I think the issue I had to raise might be even more important than what we've been talking about so far, and this theme of governing for the greater good may prove to be a bit ironic. But I have good news and bad news for you guys. The good news is you'll be glad to know that the time zone issue, the central time issue, will be rising again soon. And there's nothing anybody can do to stop it. I knew that would make you happy. And the reason that's good news for you is it gives you a chance to do something about the really bad news, which is Eastern Time kills children in Indiana. And I don't think I need to tell you guys how that works, why that happens, but for the benefit of the audience. When you send an army of children onto the streets in the middle of the night in pitch darkness, virtually in the middle of the night for much of the school year, what a surprise the traffic fatalities would result. And of course, I've got the empirical evidence to support what I'm telling you. My question that I will be getting to, you can consider a heads up, an opportunity to get on the right side of this issue, to get our fellow Republicans on the right side of this issue, because right now it's Republicans who are completely culpable for this statewide Hoosier Holocaust. And considering the empirical evidence, if you're wondering what the magnitude is, about 12 to 13 child traffic fatalities per year attributable to Eastern Time applied to the wrong geography, based on longitudinal event analysis. Since the time change in 06, we are 12, 13 child fatalities above trend. Of course, controlling for every variable you could conceivably want to control for. Oh, and for good measure, I've also got a study here that shows that Eastern Daylight Time in particular causes brain damage, literally about 16 SAT points worth of cognitive damage just from the misfortune of spending your life and growing up in a daylight saving time observing county in Indiana. So my question for you guys is, you need to know the central time movement in this state doesn't give a damn what happens to Republicans. I guarantee you, I'm the only person in the leadership of that group that cares about Republicans because of the values that we share. And that statewide organization of over 4,000 activists as of now will be coming after anybody who doesn't support Central Time for St. Joe County or most of the state. Oh, more good news for you. You need more good news. Eastern Time is not better economically, contrary to the propaganda you may have heard. I've got the evidence supporting that here also. So my question for you guys is, you will be supporting Central Time from this day forward with all your energy. Because if your political opponents and the media and the general public of Indiana ever find out the true culpability of Indiana Republicans in this statewide bloodbath, this red state could turn blue in a hurry. Let me know if I can do any more to give you enlightenment on this important issue. You will be joining me in this humanitarian cause from now on, won't you?
Is that a rhetorical question?
What makes you think that?
Wishful thinking. Well, I will just address
If
it.
it was, you don't need to answer.
But by saying, at this point, it's not my political decision to make. So like when my wife asks me questions about do certain articles of clothing make her look more or less anything, I'm not going to answer that question unless I absolutely have to. So,
No problem.
Got another question here? Sure.
Yes, I would like to switch to Central Time as well because my girlfriend is on Mountain Time and she's 2 hours behind. And I have to stay up very late when I should be sleeping. My other questions, I had two. Professor O'Brien mentioned about becoming more involved as we enter the workplace and as we start our careers. I was curious for each of you, was it something you were compelled to do, or was there something that compelled you to enter politics, or was it the plan all along? And secondly, what is your recommendation for us in a way that we can, if we have a desire to enter into the local or state?
Well, whether or not you should run for a specific office, I mean, that's something you think about, you can pray about it, you can talk to your wife about it, or wife-to-be, I guess, in your case, perhaps. But I think one thing that people forget is you can get involved in politics just by being a more careful listener and contacting your elected officials. People don't even think a lot of times even to do that. Sometimes it's hard to know, who to contact too. And it's hard to know like what problem you have and who's the best person to solve it, because there's lots of different layers of government. So that's a problem. But you have to kind of fight through it. But I hope more people do that though, to take it more seriously that way. Also involved, I mentioned the Indiana CPA Society, but being involved in some group or organization that has a presence both at the state and national levels, I think is important.
I got involved for one simple reason. I got extra credit back when I was in high school. So, and that's how I got involved in the process. And then it just kind of, like a lot of things, wherever you decide to live and start settling down, it's important that you become invested in the community that you live. And one of the ways you do this is by getting involved. If it's politically, if it's in other organizations. I think you'll find that same range you may end up coaching your kids' little league teams or getting involved in things because you want to make where you live a better place. And that's one of the ways that you can do that by getting involved.
Professor O'Brien mentioned the sense of service. And I think Notre Dame tries to instill in students. Again, I would say it's extremely important. You have a lot to offer. You may not even be aware of it, but you will have a lot to offer as you get older.
I got involved as a CPA, helping candidates, people that I knew that ran for office, to be their treasurer. And I've been treasurer probably for a dozen different candidates in the county for different offices, most of whom lost. But again, in the volunteer capacity, and I've been very involved in county Republican politics since, I guess since '88, since I graduated from college. I started working with an accounting group here in town. One of the partners there was the treasurer for a candidate, and I helped him. That helped me make more contacts. I've always been kind of fascinated by government. Well, with an accounting major, I've always had an interest in the Constitution and how government fits together, what it does, what it doesn't do, what it does too much, maybe what it shouldn't do. And so it's kind of a passion of mine, seeing how things work within society. And all of you will have the most contact with local government. You may know who your congressman or congresswoman is, but you're much more likely to bump into your township trustee or a county assessor or a local judge at church or at the grocery store. Or if you have a problem, if your recycling is not picked up, which Andy mentioned, which is a real quality of life issue. If your garbage isn't picked up and if the streets aren't plowed, then you're going to reach out to someone in local government. So I think it's important to know how things work, and because you all have tremendous skills and sharp minds, to use some of your skills and minds to either help others or to step up and fill some of those roles.
Get one more question, the young man over here, and then another one, and that'll be it. Guy, fellow with the red shirt on,
Professor O'Brien, you'd mentioned in political decision making that a lot of times personal philosophy kind of influences those decisions. I'm kind of curious to hear what your guys' opinion is on the balance between making decisions on your personal philosophy and then also considering your constituencies, like kind of personal opinions as well.
I will, or I would and will listen, because now that I'm 46, I do a better job listening than when I was 26. But I will listen to what constituents and other people have to say. But I think a decision is a bad decision, even if other folks want me to do it. I think I'm still going to go with no, and vice versa. And if it's terribly unpopular, then I won't be the county councilman next go round, which is fine with me, because I don't feel that I should spend a career in a particular position. But I think it's very important to consider and be open to other people's life experiences and their opinions, because no one knows everything. No one has the answer to everything. I do have some absolutes in my mind. I think the right to life is an absolute in my mind. Capital punishment is absolutely wrong in my mind. Now, St. Joe County Council doesn't have any input on those issues, so that's never going to come from me in that role. But I think that there are some absolutes in every politician's mind. And, it's good to listen to other people, but you still have to be guided by what you believe your conscience tells you to do, what God moves you to do.
And I think that my constituents elected me to do a good job or do the best job possible, not necessarily to do what they want. It's kind of that fine line. If 90% of my district wanted me to do something that I truly felt was wrong and it was not the best decision, then I would probably go against their 90% wishes, because I truly felt it was the wrong thing for whatever that decision was. That's kind of the balance that you face with representing the people who put you there with doing the job that they put you there to do. So
I think Andy makes a good point. I mean, you want to be a good listener. You want to take into account what the constituents want. But you'd be surprised. What I found is you have to make your ultimate decisions on your own. And there are some issues that are moral issues that are a little bit different that way, but a lot of issues are not. And so you can learn a lot. You actually can learn a lot from constituents, number one. And number two, you'd be surprised at how often, even if you're never going to go everyone's way all the time, because people are split on different issues on all sorts of different levels. And there's a lot of different issues. And they respect you when they feel like you've weighed the various types of considerations that you should bring to the issue. And I think even if you find people disagree with you, maybe on a lot of issues, they can still respect you and even vote for you, because they have a sense that you're really weighing seriously and taking the job seriously what the issues are.
One last question, yes?
Yeah, I was just watching a film called Genetic Roulette. Are you guys familiar with it? It's on GMO crops. And in that they were saying that a lot of state representatives put pressure on universities not to study genetically modified crops because the pesticide companies like Monsanto and so on, they don't want things known. They want to do their own research, and I'm wondering if any of you have been approached by some of these guys and gotten pressure in order to, in turn, put pressure on universities, and what have you done about it, and what do you feel about genetically modified crops, and can anybody speak to that? I guess Joe first.
Yeah, I have. Monsanto has lobbyists down in Indianapolis, and some of the GMO issue kind of arose a few years ago. But I don't think that happened in Indiana. I don't think that they tried to put pressure, get us to put pressure on universities in terms of this kind of research. I'm not familiar with that having happened.
Okay. There have been some lawsuits. Monsanto fought against some of the farmers saying that they stole their seed, and that was another issue. It's still ongoing. You know, Proposition 37 is a big thing. Do you like genetically modified crops, Joe, for yourself, or do you have an opinion on it?
Yeah, I have to admit I haven't thought about it that much. I don't know. That's one of those issues. It's kind of, who do you believe? I mean, are they harmful to you? I mean, it's hard for me to believe it would be in the food chain if it was harmful. But things happen, right? I mean, it could happen. So I'm just not sure how to approach it, really. Are you familiar with it?
Well, I've been trying to see, and I try to stay objective as well, but if you get a chance, there's this movie, Genetic Roulette. It's available free online until January 11th, I think, February 10th. So if you get a chance to look at that, I would be interested in seeing how you feel about it, because it really makes the food system we have scary. It sounds really scary, like Michael Taylor is in your...
What website is that?
Well, you could probably find it under Jeffrey Smith. Just Google genetic roulette, and I'm sure that it will show up.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. Did a great job for us.